welcome to this deep dive. Have you ever typed out a comment on a social media post, deleted it, rewrote it, stared at it for like 3 minutes, and then just abandoned it entirely?
Yeah, just completely bailed on it.
Exactly. Bailed on it because you were just terrified of how complete strangers might react to it. Or maybe you've caught yourself mentally rehearsing a story you're going to tell at a party.
Oh, absolutely. Tweak the details a bit.
Right. Specifically tweaking the details to make sure you sound just a little bit more impressive. Well, look, whether you are prepping for a psychology seminar, analyzing your own digital habits, or you are just insanely curious about why human beings do the bizarre things we do, you are in the exact right place today.
It is a totally universal experience, and today we are going to explore the underlying machinery of that exact experience. We are diving into the psychological drive for social validation.
Which is huge.
It really is. We are looking at why we constantly seek the approval of others. I don't mean just our inner circle of friends or family.
I mean, increasingly, it's the approval of a massive audience of complete strangers.
Yes.
And we have a really fascinating stack of research material to get through today. I mean, we are pulling from clinical psychology articles, evolutionary biology papers.
Sociological theories on digital architecture.
Yeah, and even some ancient Stoic philosophy to round it out. So our mission for this deep dive is to uncover how identity, ego, and social comparison drive our behavior behind the scenes.
And we really want to understand how modern media weaponizes this ancient biological need.
Weaponizes is the perfect word for it. But most importantly, we're going to look at how you can actually shift from seeking external applause to building what the sources call an internal scorecard. So, okay, let's unpack this. We all want to be liked.
That is pretty much a given.
Right. But looking at the evolutionary biology sources, it seems really clear that caring about what people think isn't just a quirky personality trait.
Or some modern character flaw.
Exactly. There is a deeply ingrained biological mechanism at work here, right?
Well, it's not quite that simple to just call it a mechanism. It is the fundamental architecture of our survival. What's fascinating here is that the intense desire for validation is an ancient, hardwired imperative.
Okay.
To really understand it, we have to mentally travel back to our ancestral environments. Because early humans did not live in sprawling metropolises.
Obviously not.
They roamed the savanna in small, highly interdependent groups. We are talking about tribes that typically contained up to about 150 people.
Which is what researchers refer to as Dunbar's number. Correct.
Precisely.
It's the cognitive limit to the number of people with whom we can maintain stable social relationships.
Up to about 150 people, yeah. And in that specific environment, staying in the good graces of your tribe wasn't just about having a pleasant weekend.
It meant you survived.
It meant you had access to the collective resources of the group. It meant you got a share of the food from the hunt. You had protection from apex predators while you slept.
And a community to help raise your offspring.
Right, so if you were rejected by the herd, if you were ostracized or deemed a burden, it was not merely a hit to your self-esteem. Rejection literally meant death.
Wow.
A human being isolated on the savanna simply could not survive the elements or the predators alone.
That paints such a stark picture. I mean, it completely changes the context of why getting a rude comment online or feeling left out of a group chat physically hurts in your chest.
It's a physical sensation.
It really is. It is not just our feelings getting bruised. Our biology is screaming at us that we have been kicked out of the cave and a saber-toothed tiger is waiting for us.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it. The brain treats social standing as what the clinical literature calls a homeostatic requirement.
Can we pause on that for a second? Homeostatic requirement. That's a fairly heavy academic term.
Yeah.
If we were to explain that to someone with no background in biology, what does that actually mean in practice?
Think of it like the thermostat in your house. Or more accurately, how your body regulates its own internal temperature. If you get too cold, your body initiates shivering to generate heat.
Right, to warm you up.
And if your blood sugar drops, your brain sends urgent hunger signals. Your body is constantly trying to maintain a baseline of stability. That is homeostasis.
Okay, got tracked.
The research indicates that the brain regulates our sense of belonging in the exact same way. It is famously outlined in the optimal belongingness theory.
Optimal belongingness theory.
Yes. We strive to maintain a satiated, balanced state of connection. If that connection drops below a certain threshold, the alarms go off.
And those alarms are literal chemicals in the brain.
The neurochemistry is incredibly potent. When we perceive an increase in our social status, say someone compliments you in front of the group.
Or you demonstrate a valuable skill.
Exactly. The brain rewards you by releasing serotonin.
The happy chemical.
Yes, serotonin is a neurotransmitter that promotes feelings of security, confidence, and well-being. But here is the catch.
There's always a catch.
Serotonin is metabolized very quickly. The good feeling does not last forever.
So you have to keep going back to the well. You have to keep maintaining your status or performing for the group just to get the next hit of security.
Exactly. And the flip side is even more powerful. When our status is threatened, when we perceive rejection, judgment, or even just a lack of expected enthusiasm from the group, the brain releases cortisol.
Cortisol being the stress hormone.
Cortisol is the primary stress hormone. It is the threat detection chemical. It creates a full-body sense of panic, hypervigilance, and anxiety. It prepares your body to fight or flee.
So even if I logically know I'm fine, my body thinks I'm in danger.
Because the rational verbal part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, is not always in perfect communication with the older emotional mammalian part of our brain.
Right.
So we often find ourselves desperately pursuing status even when we consciously tell ourselves, I don't care what people think.
Because the neurochemical urgency of that cortisol alarm is just too strong to override with simple logical willpower.
You can't just think your way out of biology.
We are essentially carrying around this ancient biological programming that is constantly, obsessively monitoring where we stand in the pecking order.
Yes.
And the sources introduce a concept that takes this even further, called social verification theory. From what I gathered, this suggests that it is not just about survival, it is about how we use the group to actually determine reality itself.
That's right.
Can you walk me through how we rely on others to validate what is real? Because that sounds wild.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this theory explains some of the most baffling aspects of human behavior. No single person holds a perfect, flawless, internal representation of objective reality.
Our memories are terrible.
Our perceptions, our memories, our interpretations of events, they can all be incredibly flawed. Because we know this on some level, we use social reality as a substitute for objective truth.
So we look to the group.
We look around to see what our group thinks, feels, or believes in order to figure out what is true or appropriate.
Like, if I am at a funeral and I am not sure how to act, I look around to see if people are crying or being stoic, and I adjust my behavior to match the social reality of the room.
That is a prime example. This convergence of perceptions is vital for group cohesion. A tribe needs to agree on what constitutes a threat and what constitutes an opportunity.
But the friction happens when you disagree with the tribe.
Yes. When there is an inconsistency between what you feel internally, your subjective reality, and what the group tells you is correct, the social reality.
That creates cognitive dissonance.
Profound cognitive dissonance. It threatens your core need to belong. Your brain starts to run the calculation. If I do not see the world the way my tribe does, maybe I am defective.
Maybe I don't belong here.
And because historically not belonging equals danger, that inconsistency is experienced as an incredibly aversive, painful threat.
This perfectly sets up one of the most wild psychological experiments mentioned in our stack of sources. I was reading this and I genuinely couldn't wrap my head around it at first.
The Schachter and Singer study.
Yes. The 1962 Schachter and Singer study. Can you break down the methodology of this experiment? Because it's fascinating.
It is a landmark study, and it perfectly illustrates the power of social verification. Schachter and Singer brought participants into a lab and gave them an injection of epinephrine.
Which is essentially adrenaline.
Exactly. And as you might expect, adrenaline causes significant physical arousal. Your heart rate skyrockets, your breathing gets shallow, your hands might tremble.
You are physically revved up.
You are very revved up.
But the researchers didn't actually tell all the participants what the drug would do to them.
Right. That was the crucial manipulation. They had a group of participants who were entirely uninformed about the side effects of the injection.
Oh, man.
So these individuals are sitting in a waiting room, their hearts are pounding out of their chests, their hands are shaking.
And they have absolutely no internal context for why this is happening.
None. Their internal state is highly aroused, but completely ambiguous.
And this is where they introduce the actor.
Yes. The researchers placed a Confederate, an actor, working for the study in the room with the uninformed participant.
All right.
In one condition, the actor started behaving in a highly aggressive, angry manner, stomping around, complaining about the experiment, acting furious.
Throwing a tantrum.
Exactly. And in another condition, the actor behaved in a euphoric, joyful, almost manic way, playing with hula hoops and throwing paper airplanes.
And what happened to the participants whose hearts were racing?
The participants completely outsourced their emotional reality to the stranger in the room.
They copied them.
The participants who were with the angry actor reported feeling intense anger. The participants who were with the euphoric actor reported feeling intense happiness and euphoria.
That is insane. Keep in mind, their underlying physical arousal, the adrenaline, was identical.
Identical.
But because their internal state was ambiguous, they looked to the social environment to verify what they should be feeling. They relied on a complete stranger to validate their own emotional reality.
It is just staggering. It shows how profoundly subjective our emotions can be. If we don't have a clear internal anchor, we just absorb the reality of whoever is standing next to us.
It really makes you think about crowd dynamics in the modern world.
No, absolutely.
If you take that biological wiring, that reliance on the group to define reality, and you put it in a crowd of thousands at a concert.
Or a tense political protest.
Right. People are just bouncing their emotional states off of each other, constantly seeking verification.
It scales up massively. And this non-objectivity of emotion is why emotions fall so heavily under the purview of social reality, and by extension, why our emotions can be invalidated.
Also,
Think about it this way. If someone tells you that a block of ice is warm, you don't feel biologically threatened.
no, I just think they are absurd, because ice is objectively cold.
The physical world is verifiable.
Right, I don't need my tribe to tell me ice is cold. My hand tells me that.
Exactly. But if you receive tragic news and you are feeling immense grief, and someone tells you you shouldn't feel sad about that, you are overreacting.
That is deeply distressing.
It is profoundly invalidating. The distress doesn't come from a physical threat. It comes from that mismatch between your subjective internal reality and the social feedback you are receiving.
It triggers that cortisol alarm system, warning you that you are out of sync with the tribe.
Precisely.
Okay, so we have this picture of human beings wandering the ancestral savanna, deeply wired to fear rejection, constantly reading the room to ensure their emotions match the group, and relying on a tribe of about 150 people to literally stay alive.
That's the baseline.
But how on earth does this ancient hardware function today? Because our tribe is no longer just 150 people we know intimately.
Not even close.
We live in cities with millions of people. I can walk out my front door and see more strangers in 10 minutes than my ancestors saw in their entire lifetimes. How does this survival mechanism adapt to the modern world?
To put it bluntly, it doesn't adapt well. It overloads.
It short circuits.
The system was designed for a specific environment, and we have fundamentally changed that environment. To truly understand how this manifests today, before we even get to the massive scale of the internet, we have to look at the inner workings of the modern individual.
The day-to-day.
Yes, we have to look at how this biological need for validation creates what the clinical sources call the approval seeker in our daily interpersonal lives.
I really want to dig into this, because the clinical literature gives a very clear, almost uncomfortable picture of what an approval seeker looks like on a normal Tuesday. Let's frame this for you, the listener. How does this ancient wiring show up in your life? Do you find yourself excessively apologizing?
And we don't mean apologizing when you make a genuine mistake.
No, I mean apologizing to a table that you accidentally bumped into. Or a waiter messes up your order, brings you the completely wrong meal, and you find yourself saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry, but I think this might be wrong."
As if having your own needs or taking up physical space is somehow a burden to others.
Yes, that excessive apologizing is a hallmark sign. It is a preemptive strike against potential disapproval.
It's managing the threat before it happens.
What about overcommitting? You say yes to a project at work or a social event you absolutely dread simply because the thought of saying no, the thought of potentially disappointing someone or facing a micro-expression of their disapproval feels literally unbearable.
You'd rather suffer through the event than face the cortisol spike of their disappointment.
Or maybe you feel a deep, creeping discomfort, even a low-level panic, when you are in a group and you aren't being actively reassured or centered. You might constantly ask your partner, "Are you mad at me?"
Or did I do something wrong? When they're literally just sitting quietly reading a book.
Exactly. Where does this specific, intense anxiety come from? Why do some people manage this evolutionary drive okay, while others become crippled by it?
While we all share the baseline evolutionary drive to belong, developmental psychology points heavily toward childhood experiences as the divergence point.
It always comes back to childhood.
It usually does. An excessive, almost crippling need for validation typically stems from how an individual's sense of self was formed, or failed to form, in their earliest environments. The clinical sources indicate it usually arises from one of two extremes.
Let's walk through those extremes. What is the first one?
The first extreme is emotional invalidation or neglect. Imagine a child growing up in an environment where their feelings are consistently dismissed.
Like if they cry, they're told they are being dramatic.
Or if they are proud of something, they are ignored. Or perhaps the acceptance they receive is highly conditional. They are only praised when they achieve perfect grades or when they are perfectly quiet.
In this environment, the child learns a devastating lesson. They learn, I am not inherently valuable just for existing.
So they learn that to survive, they have to perform.
They have to earn their keep.
Exactly. They learn that they must hide their true needs, suppress their authentic emotions, and constantly perform to secure any meager form of love, attention, or safety.
And how does that translate into adulthood?
As adults, this manifests as high levels of chronic anxiety, an inability to trust others, and a constant, desperate scanning of the environment for signs of rejection.
They're always waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yes. In severe clinical cases, this profound lack of an internal anchor is associated with traits seen in borderline personality disorder. They are perpetually starving for the validation they were denied.
Okay, so that is the starvation model.
Yeah.
But I was really surprised reading the sources because the research also highlights the exact opposite environment. It talks about what happens when a child gets too much praise.
The overvaluation model.
Yeah. How can too much validation be a bad thing?
It seems counterintuitive, but the other extreme, receiving excessive praise and overvaluation, can be just as damaging to the formation of an internal anchor.
How so?
If a child is constantly told they are superior to others, if they're treated as the absolute center of the universe, or if their every minor, mundane action is met with thunderous, unearned applause, they do not develop a realistic sense of self.
And more importantly, they never develop the internal capacity for self-soothing.
Because they have never had to deal with frustration or ordinary failure on their own, the environment always swooped in to tell them they were perfect.
Right. They become entirely dependent on that high-octane level of external input to maintain their sense of self-worth.
It is an artificial inflation. In adulthood, when the real world inevitably does not treat them like the center of the universe, they experience profound distress.
Because the world isn't clapping for them putting away their laundry.
Exactly. This can lead to severe interpersonal difficulties, a deeply rooted sense of entitlement, and traits associated with narcissistic personality disorder.
They constantly require external validation because they literally never learned how to validate themselves.
That's the crux of it.
So whether you were starved for approval or drowning in unearned applause, the result is surprisingly similar. You end up as an adult frantically searching the outside world for something to stabilize your inside world.
And it feels like this must create a massive internal conflict.
It creates a foundational schism in the psyche. If we connect this to the bigger picture, what we are really talking about is the classic conflict between the ego and the shadow self.
A concept heavily explored by the psychoanalyst Carl Jung.
Right. The ego is the mask we construct to show the world. It is the highly curated, idealized version of ourselves that we desperately hope will win the applause and approval of the tribe.
We build this mask based on what our parents, our culture, or our peer group has deemed impressive or acceptable.
And what happens to all the parts of us that don't fit that impressive mask?
They get repressed. To maintain the pristine mask of the ego, we have to actively push down all the messy, unacceptable parts of ourselves.
Our fears, our deep-seated insecurities.
Our unconventional desires, our failures, all of that gets relegated to the shadow self. The shadow is everything we are terrified the tribe will reject.
This brings up a concept from one of our sources, the author Ollie Anderson. He takes this Jungian dynamic and gives it a very modern, somewhat brutal label. He refers to people trapped in this dynamic as shame puppets.
Shame puppets.
I know, it sounds a bit dark, but it is incredibly descriptive.
It is an apt term.
A shame puppet is someone whose entire behavioral repertoire is dictated by a desperate attempt to hide their deep-seated shame and keep their shadow self concealed.
How does Anderson describe their day-to-day behavior?
He argues that everything they do is filtered through a single lens, They're constantly asking themselves, how can I get an ego stroke and avoid being seen as inadequate?
So it dictates every choice.
Everything. The clothes they buy, the stories they choose to tell at dinner parties, the way they constantly posture in conversations to seem like the smartest person in the room. It is all puppeteered by the fear of being found out,
They're completely disconnected from their true, authentic self.
or their realness, as Anderson calls it.
And this highlights the ultimate tragedy of the approval seeker. Because they are so disconnected from the truth of who they are, the validation they work so hard to extract never actually satisfies them.
Why not? If they get the applause, shouldn't they feel better?
No, because deep down, in the quiet moments, they know the truth. When you are pretending to be something you are not, and people applaud you, you know they are applauding the mask.
They're not applauding you.
Exactly. It creates a temporary release of tension, a fleeting dopamine hit, but it leaves a massive echoing void that can never be filled by external means.
The applause is for the ego, while the shadow remains starved and terrified.
It becomes a literal behavioral addiction.
To make this even more tangible, the sources use this brilliant analogy. It is the balloon analogy, specifically referring to a state of unreal self-inflation.
I like this one.
Imagine you have a balloon, and you are blowing it up with accomplishments, luxury items, name-dropping, and boastful stories. You inflate this massive, shiny balloon to hide your insecurities and prove your worth to the world.
But here's the problem. Because there is no solid internal foundation of self-acceptance, because you never actually tied the balloon off it, the air is constantly leaking out.
The feeling of being enough always deflates.
Always. The feeling deflates, and so you are forced to frantically run around searching for your next source of validation.
Your next compliment, your next achievement, just to pump the balloon back up so nobody sees how small you really feel.
Thinking about living like that, it sounds absolutely soul-crushingly exhausting.
It is exhausting for the individual, but it also makes these individuals incredibly draining and inherently untrustworthy in relationship.
Because they're always taking.
Often, they don't even realize they are doing it because their primary unconscious goal in any interaction is to extract validation to keep their balloon inflated. They are constantly taking energy from the dynamic rather than giving it.
They filter every conversation through their need for ego maintenance.
So they aren't actually listening to you. They are waiting for their turn to speak so they can impress you.
Precisely. You cannot build a genuine, vulnerable connection with someone who is fundamentally terrified of being seen without their mask.
Because genuine connection requires two people lowering their defenses.
If you stop feeding a shame puppet's ego, if you stop blowing up their balloon, they will often become resentful, lose interest, and move on to find a new supply of validation elsewhere.
Okay, so let's summarize where we are. We have this picture of the modern approval seeker. They are wired by millions of years of evolution to fear rejection as a matter of life and death.
Check.
Their childhood experiences may have left them without an internal anchor, making them completely reliant on the outside world to validate their existence.
That's it.
And they were walking around with an untied balloon, frantically trying to keep it inflated. Here is where it gets really interesting. What happens when you take that fragile, vulnerable, desperate psychology and you plug it into a smartphone?
You ignite a perfect storm. The modern digital environment, specifically the architecture of social media, has industrialized our biological need for validation.
Industrialized it.
It has taken an ancient survival mechanism and turned it into a massive, globally scaled economy.
We mentioned Dunbar's number earlier. The idea that our brains are optimized to manage a tribe of roughly 150 people. The sources contrast this with something called the monolithic social graph.
Yes, the monolithic social graph.
Can we translate that jargon? What does it actually mean for our brains to interact with a monolithic social graph?
A monolithic social graph refers to the massive, centralized, and quantified networks we use today. Instead of interacting with a small, known community where you understand your role, your history, and your standing.
Which is how we evolve.
Right. You are now standing on a digital stage performing for millions of overlapping nodes. It is a giant, often faceless audience of complete strangers, acquaintances, ex-coworkers, and bots.
And bots.
We have moved from seeking the necessary functional approval of our village to performing for an infinite, unappeasable crowd. And our brains simply do not have the hardware to process the scale of potential judgment.
And the cognitive biases we naturally possess make this digital stage incredibly toxic. The sources spent a lot of time on something called the spotlight effect.
This is a big one.
It's a cognitive bias where we significantly overestimate how much people actually notice our flaws, our actions, or our appearance. Basically, because we are the absolute center of our own internal universe, we erroneously assume that everyone else must be focused on us too.
It is a pervasive bias, but the research highlights that it is particularly intense and damaging during adolescence.
Right. Between the ages of 11 and 21, the human brain is going through massive developmental changes. And teenagers are highly biologically egocentric.
They literally lack the cognitive development and life experience to easily shift away from their own perspective.
Now imagine being an adolescent, already trapped in the height of the spotlight effect, and you are handed a device that allows your thoughts, your photos, and your awkward moments to be instantly broadcast to the monolithic social graph.
The digital spotlight feels blinding. It is incredibly damaging to their psychological development because they genuinely, biologically believe that everyone in their network is intensely scrutinizing their every move. The anxiety is paralyzing.
This raises a really dark question for me. We know the brain is vulnerable to this. We know adolescents are vulnerable to this. How does the actual intentional architecture of these digital platforms exploit that fear of the spotlight?
That is the core issue with the modern digital landscape. This raises an important question regarding how digital metrics, likes, views, follower counts, simulate a state of constant, pervasive surveillance.
It's like having a scoreboard hovering over your head all day.
Exactly. Digital platforms do not merely facilitate communication, they are designed to quantify our social worth. When you post something online, you are immediately entering a high-stakes neurological feedback loop.
A slot machine.
If the numbers go up, if the likes pour in, you get that microdose of dopamine and serotonin, your ancient brain lights up and says, "The tribe loves us, we are high status, we are safe."
But simultaneously, the potential for silence, which is a form of digital ostracism, or the potential for negative comments, activates the threat system.
It triggers the cortisol alarm. So you are constantly toggling back and forth between profound neurological reward and profound neurological threat dozens of times a day.
It turns social interaction into a relentless economy where your self-worth is the fluctuating currency.
And it is an economy that is entirely dictated by algorithms.
The sources make a clear distinction between early social networking and modern social media. Early on, it was just a tool to keep up with your actual friends, your Dunbar group.
150 people.
But now, you are actively performing for an algorithm in order to reach strangers. And the algorithm prioritizes content that goes viral. And what goes viral?
Simple, highly emotional, confrontational, and polarizing content. The algorithms are optimized for engagement, and nothing engages the human nervous system quite like a perceived threat or moral violation.
Which leads to what the sources call moral outrage networks.
Yeah.
This completely shifted my perspective on internet culture. We look at Twitter or comment sections, and everyone is constantly furious about something. But the research suggests that a lot of this anger isn't even genuine problem solving. It is something called status labor.
Can you explain status labor in the context of moral outrage?
The sources frame it brilliantly. In a moral outrage network, expressing extreme anger or indignation about a topic is rarely about actually fixing the underlying issue. Instead, it is a performance. It is status labor.
You're working for your social standing.
It is a way of signaling your purity and your adherence to the strict norms of your specific digital in-group. By performing outrage, you are broadcasting a signal, look at me, I am on the right side of this issue. I am a good, loyal, fiercely protective member of this tribe. Please validate me.
So the outrage itself is just the currency they're using to buy belonging.
Precisely. And the outrage circulates so much faster than nuanced, boring truth because it triggers that immediate emotional response in others.
It demands that observers either join the outrage to signal their own loyalty or face being targeted themselves.
Which creates an environment of permanent, exhausting indignation. People become locked in this cycle, performing their morality for an audience of strangers just to get that quick serotonin hit of validation.
It completely replaces actual, thoughtful deliberation. It leads to massive social fragmentation and severe emotional burnout for the users.
So we are exhausted, we are anxious, our cortisol is spiking all day, and we are performing a bizarre theater of outrage for people we don't even know.
It sounds bleak when you lay it out like that.
It really does. And there is a specific paradox mentioned in the sources that perfectly captures the ultimate futility of all this posturing. It's called the rich man in the car paradox. I love this because it is so incredibly relatable.
It is a phenomenal illustration of the illusion of external validation. Walk us through it.
Okay, let's say you are walking down the street and a guy drives past you in a stunning, gleaming $200,000 Ferrari. According to the paradox, you do not look at that guy behind the wheel and think, wow, he's so cool. I deeply admire him as a human being.
No, nobody thinks that.
No. You look at the car, and you immediately imagine how cool you would look driving it. The driver bought that incredibly expensive car specifically to signal his high status to strangers to get their validation.
But his attempt completely bypasses the observer.
The observer's own ego ignores the driver entirely and just inserts themselves into the fantasy.
The driver's attempt at status signaling is a total failure in its intended goal.
Right. It proves that showing off to impress strangers is a totally inefficient use of your energy. You're spending a fortune to impress people who are only thinking about themselves.
Which applies directly to modern Instagram culture.
People are going into debt to travel to exotic locations, spending hours getting the perfect angled shot, just to post it for strangers who look at the photo for half a second, feel a pang of jealousy, imagine themselves on that beach, and keep scrolling.
The person posting gets nothing real out of it.
It is the ultimate illusion. You believe the material symbol or the curated digital aesthetic will secure your status and bring you genuine admiration. But it only feeds the observer's own comparison loop.
And this leads us directly to the massive socioeconomic toll of this biological drive. The desperate desire to impress strangers drives what the research calls emotional spending.
Emotional spending, meaning buying things not because you need them, but to manage your feelings.
Exactly. People make significant financial purchases not based on a rational assessment of their utility, but driven entirely by emotional states. Whether it is sadness, a need for a quick dopamine hit to alleviate the stress of the day, or, most commonly, the desperate need to signal status to a peer group to ensure belonging.
And this emotional spending directly sabotages long-term financial stability.
People accumulate massive credit card debt, falling into what is called a salary trap, where they are working relentlessly just to maintain an idealized, visually impressive lifestyle for an audience that, frankly, does not care about them.
If seeking validation from strangers is this inefficient, if it is this exhausting, and if it is literally driving people into financial ruin, what is the deeper psychological toll? Beyond the credit card debt, what is happening to our mental health, our decision-making, and our fundamental authenticity when we live like this?
The systemic costs are devastating, and they compound over time. On a foundational mental health level, the constant low-grade vigilance required to monitor how others perceive you leads to chronic anxiety.
You're just always on edge.
When your self-worth is tethered to a fluctuating metric like how many likes your post got or how a coworker looked at you in a meeting, your nervous system is essentially under constant attack. You are never safe.
Over years and decades, this chronic stress load can lead to emotional numbness and severe clinical depression.
Because when the approval isn't there, your biological hardware assumes you have failed at survival.
And we lose our identity in the process. We literally sacrifice who we are just to fit in. The sources frame this using self-determination theory. Can you break down the core components of that theory?
Self-determination theory posits that human beings have three innate, universal psychological needs that must be met for optimal well-being.
What are they?
The first is autonomy, the need to feel in control of your own life and choices. The second is competence, the need to feel capable and effective in your environment. And the third is relatedness, the deep need to feel connected to and understood by others.
So autonomy, competence, and relatedness. How does the approval seeker disrupt this balance?
What happens is a tragic trade-off. In the desperate pursuit of validation, we sacrifice our autonomy, doing what we genuinely value and desire, in order to secure relatedness.
We let the crowd dictate our choices.
We study the major our parents want, we buy the clothes our peer group approves of, we adopt the political opinions of our digital echo chamber. We abandon our autonomy to ensure we aren't rejected.
And the sources mention that this constant conforming causes something called cognitive inflexibility. If I'm trying to explain cognitive inflexibility to someone, I imagine it like a record player getting stuck on a single scratch.
That's a good way to look at it.
Your mind just loops over and over on ego preservation. You can't actually step back and solve real problems in your life or grow as a person because all of your mental bandwidth is tied up in ruminating.
You are just stewing in sadness and anger when you don't get the applause you feel you are owed.
That is an excellent analogy. The focus of your entire consciousness narrows to ego preservation rather than actual growth or discovery. Over years of conforming to what others want and expecting external rewards, people lose trust in their own internal judgment.
They wake up one day in their 30s or 40s and realize they don't actually know who they are.
They don't know what they enjoy doing when no one is watching. They don't know what they truly believe. They have become ultimate social chameleons.
Which brings up a really poignant personal anecdote from one of the sources. Psychologist and executive coach Sacha Crouch wrote about her own agonizing experience with this exact phenomenon.
She literally called herself the queen of social chameleons.
She had spent her life mastering the art of reading the room and telling people exactly what they wanted to hear. But she realized that she was so terrified of criticism, so deeply worried about what others thought of her, that it was actively sabotaging her life.
How did it manifest in her career?
Early in her coaching career, she received an incredible opportunity. She was given a highly lucrative referral to coach the CEO of a major corporation.
Wow, that's huge.
The potential reward was huge. It would have elevated her entire business. But with high reward comes high visibility, and the possibility for public criticism or failure was also large.
Her biological need for approval must have been screaming at her.
Her paralyzing fear of potential disapproval from this high-status client was so intense that she actually turned the opportunity down.
You're kidding.
She literally told the client she wasn't the right person for the job and gave the referral away to someone else. Her desperate need for validation, her fear of having her balloon popped, directly cost her major career growth and financial success.
It is a deeply powerful individual example of how the fear of invalidation paralyzes us. We shrink our lives to avoid the potential of being judged. But we also have to look at how this dynamic scales up.
On a macro level.
Yes, on a macro level, this overwhelming desire for validation shapes society in alarming ways. Consider the phenomena of selective exposure and the creation of echo chambers.
How does the biology of validation create an echo chamber?
Remember earlier we discussed how encountering information or opinions that contradict our subjective reality and validation is experienced by the brain as a literal biological threat.
The cortisol spike.
Because it feels like a threat, people naturally, unconsciously seek out environments where their pre-existing beliefs will only be affirmed. They curate their news feeds, their friend groups, and their neighborhoods to ensure they are never challenged.
This is confirmation bias, but weaponized by our ancient survival need to belong to a unified tribe.
Right, and if you never encounter a challenging idea, you start to believe your specific reality is the only reality, which naturally breeds conspiracy thinking.
Precisely. And this leads to perhaps the most intense macro-level consequence discussed in the sociological sources, the rise of extremist online groups.
Now, we must remain entirely impartial here and simply report what the sociological data and psychological research indicate.
Yes. Whether we are looking at far-right political groups, far-left factions, or insular communities like online incel networks, the underlying psychological mechanism driving recruitment is often strikingly similar.
It's driven by that feeling of the belongingness threat, right?
Yeah.
Yes. The research specifically looks at how feelings of profound societal ostracism, vulnerability, and a lack of clear identity drive individuals toward these insular extremist communities.
Individuals who feel rejected by mainstream society.
Or who feel that they cannot meet societal expectations. They experience a massive chronic belongingness threat. Their cortisol alarms are blaring constantly. In their desperation for validation, they seek out fringe communities.
And those communities welcome them with open arms as long as they adopt the extreme ideology.
Exactly. In these fringe groups, their anger, their specific worldview, and their intense sense of victimhood are heavily enthusiastically validated by the new group.
The sociological insight here is that the specific ideology of the group is often secondary.
The primary driver is the intense, overwhelming neurochemical reward of finally finding a tribe that verifies their existence, tells them they're right, and validates their grievances against the outside world.
It is the ultimate tragic manipulation of our evolutionary wiring.
It really is.
That is incredibly heavy, but it connects all the dots so clearly. We literally bend our personal reality. We sabotage our careers like Sacha Crouch. And we even fracture our entire societal structures into warring factions, all just to avoid the biological pain of being told we don't belong.
It's a powerful force.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? If this ancient programming is running silently in the background of your mind, driving you to apologize to furniture, buy cars you can't afford, and perform fake outrage online, how do you escape this loop? Are we just doomed to be shame puppets? How do we break free?
We are not doomed. But the path out is not easy. It requires a conscious, deliberate, and sometimes painful shift from relying on external validation to cultivating internal validation.
You have to actively do the work to decouple your fundamental sense of self-worth from your public visibility and the ever-fluctuating opinions of others.
The clinical and philosophical sources provide very concrete, actionable strategies for this, and it begins with self-awareness and boundary setting.
Step one is realizing when you are actually doing it. You can't fix a program you don't know is running. You have to recognize the impulse in real time.
Before you post a photo, before you buy the expensive jacket, before you chime in on a debate, you have to stop and ask yourself a hard question.
Am I doing this because it aligns with my values or because I desperately need 50 strangers to tell me I am acceptable?
And once you catch the impulse, you have to replace that frantic need for external input with an internal capacity for self-soothing.
That is where the clinical interventions come into play. There is a fascinating 2011 study mentioned in the research regarding mindfulness meditation.
Yes, the MRI study. Walk us through what they found, because it proves you can actually change the hardware.
Okay, the researchers took individuals who did not meditate and put them through an 8-week mindfulness meditation program. They took MRI scans of their brains before and after.
And the results were physical, not just emotional.
The study found that just 8 weeks of practice physically changed the structure of the brain. It measurably increased the gray matter density in the hippocampus and other areas related to emotional regulation, empathy, self-awareness, and decision-making.
So by practicing mindfulness, by sitting quietly and learning to observe your thoughts without immediately reacting to them, you are literally rebuilding the hardware of your brain to better regulate that cortisol alarm system.
Exactly. You are strengthening the prefrontal cortex's ability to tell the emotional limbic system, we are not being chased by a tiger just because someone didn't like our tweet.
You become significantly less dependent on others to calm you down or validate your choices, because your brain has built the physical infrastructure to soothe itself.
That is incredible. And alongside the internal work, the sources emphasize setting strict external boundaries. You have to protect your energy.
This brings us back to Ollie Anderson, the author who coined shame puppets.
He has a phenomenal, blunt rule for dealing with people who are trapped in their own ego loops. He says you have to adopt the boundary of, give me something real, or GTFO, get out.
It is a harsh boundary, but a necessary one. If you are interacting with someone and you realize the interaction is entirely contrived, they are just posturing, name-dropping, and using you as an audience for their self-inflation, you have to recognize that they are draining your energy.
They're not offering genuine relatedness.
You have the absolute right to walk away from people who only view you as a mirror for their ego.
I love that. Give me something real. Demand authenticity from your interactions. And we aren't the first generation to deal with the exhaustion of performing for a crowd. The ancients figured this out thousands of years ago.
The sources point heavily to the Stoic philosophers as practically the ultimate guide to overcoming the need for external approval.
Indeed, Stoicism offers a profound, time-tested framework. The entire philosophy is anchored in what they call the dichotomy of control.
The core tenet is ruthlessly simple, though difficult to practice.
You must focus your energy exclusively on what is fully within your control. Your own character, your choices, your ethical judgments, and you must practice radical indifference to what is outside your control.
And the opinions, applause, or judgments of other people firmly reside outside your control.
There's a quote from the Stoic philosopher Epictetus in the sources that hit me like a ton of bricks. He famously said, if you are ever tempted to look for outside approval, realize that you have compromised your integrity. If you need a witness, be your own.
If you need a witness, be your own. It is the ultimate call to build an internal scorecard.
I look at someone like Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor. He is the perfect case study for this.
He was arguably the most powerful man on the face of the earth.
He literally had crowds of thousands cheering for him in the streets of Rome, treating him like a living god. And simultaneously, he had political enemies plotting to assassinate him and spreading vicious rumors.
He was surrounded by the most intense external validation and invalidation possible.
But his private journal, Meditations, reveals that he actively trained himself to ignore both the cheering and the booing. He realized the clapping was completely meaningless because it was based on the crowd's whims, not his actual character.
And the criticism was meaningless for the same reason.
He evaluated himself entirely based on his inner scorecard. Did he act with justice, wisdom, courage, and temperance today? If yes, the crowd's opinion didn't matter.
Building an inner scorecard is the ultimate antidote to the spotlight effect, but it requires a fundamental shift in how you allocate your time and attention. This brings us to a beautiful concept discussed by the 20th century political philosopher Hannah Arendt.
She made a vital distinction between the vita activa and the vita contemplativa,
The vita activa being the active life of public performance, political action, and visibility.
and the vita contemplativa being the life of quiet contemplation, philosophical reflection, and private inner development.
And modern digital life has completely, overwhelmingly prioritized the vita activa. If it isn't documented, photographed, uploaded, and validated online, we genuinely feel as though it didn't happen.
Yes. To combat this deeply ingrained habit, the sources suggest an intentional rebellion, intentionally reclaiming the vita contemplativa.
The specific advice the sources give here is so beautifully countercultural, but I have to admit I struggle with it.
What's the advice?
The advice is do things in secret. Take up a new hobby, painting, knitting, woodworking, be genuinely terrible at it, and never post a single picture of your progress online. Perform a significant act of kindness for someone and take the secret to your grave. Never tell a single soul you did it.
You find that difficult?
I do. It creates so much friction.
Yeah.
Isn't doing things in total secret incredibly lonely? How do we balance Arndt's vita contemplativa with Dunbar's biological reality that we need a tribe to survive?
That friction you feel is the withdrawal symptom of the validation addiction. It feels lonely at first because your ego is starved of its usual diet of applause.
Okay, that makes sense.
But doing things in secret is how you build a resilient identity. When you do something of value and nobody claps, you are proving to your own brain that you exist and that your actions have inherent worth, entirely independent of the monolithic social graph.
You are tying off the balloon.
Exactly. It doesn't mean becoming a hermit. It means ensuring that your foundation is self-generated. Once your foundation is solid, you can interact with your tribe from a place of abundance, not desperate need.
So, we aren't saying that all external validation is evil. The biological need for connection is real.
You can use validation, you just cannot let it use you. There is a fantastic practical example of this in the sources. The author Hanan Parvez wrote about his experience learning to play the piano as an adult.
Learning an instrument is tedious, it's frustrating, and motivation naturally wanes.
So he made a strategic decision. He intentionally used his social media stories to post raw recordings of his daily practice. He leveraged the validation from his digital tribe as an account.
When he got a positive comment, it gave him the dopamine boost he needed to push through a difficult learning curve. It actually sped up his progress.
That is a brilliant distinction. What makes his approach healthy, whereas the emotional spender is unhealthy?
It is entirely about intention and locus of control. Parvez wasn't posting piano videos to prove his fundamental worth as a human being. He wasn't tying his identity to the likes.
He was utilizing a known psychological mechanism, social accountability, to achieve an internally defined goal. He controlled the tool didn't control him.
If nobody liked the video, he was still going to play the piano tomorrow because the goal was mastery, not applause.
That distinction is the key to thriving in the modern world. Healthy validation occurs within the context of authentic relationships and internally driven goals. It is the profound difference between seeking approval to fill an agonizing void of shame and sharing a genuine, hard-won accomplishment with a supportive community.
What a massive, illuminating journey this has been.
We have traveled all the way from the ancient savannah, where our ancestors huddled together in tribes of 150, absolutely terrified of being exiled to the wilderness, all the way to the glow of the modern smartphone.
We've seen how we perform for cold algorithms and a monolithic audience of strangers, triggering those exact same life-or-death survival alarms.
We have unpacked the childhood roots of the approval seeker, the exhausting reality of the shame puppet trying to keep their balloon inflated, the financial ruin of emotional spending, and the profound, enduring wisdom of the Stoics in building an unshakable inner scorecard.
To synthesize all of this, the intense desire to impress others is an archaic biological program running on modern, mismatched hardware. It drives us to conform, to hide our shadows, and to endlessly chase a moving target of public approval that will never, ever truly satisfy us.
But true power and lasting psychological peace are not found in the spotlight of millions of strangers. They are found in the quiet, resilient integrity of your own choices. When you understand the evolutionary and psychological mechanisms at play, you can finally step off the hamster wheel.
It's a choice you have to make every day.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. We spend so much of our precious energy, our money, and our anxiety curating our lives for the digital gaze of the crowd.
But imagine a scenario.
Imagine a world where the internet permanently goes down tomorrow. No more followers, no more metrics, no more audience of strangers ever again. If your entire digital audience vanished overnight into thin air, what would you actually do with your life tomorrow morning? Who are you when absolutely no one is watching?
That is the ultimate question.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. You are the reason we do this, the ultimate seekers of knowledge, trying to make sense of this wild human experience. Keep questioning, keep learning, build that inner scorecard, and we will see you next time.